Imagine walking through endless halls, each shelf taller than a cathedral, stacked with scrolls and codices from every corner of the ancient world. Not just Greek philosophy, but works from Babylonian astronomers, Indian mathematicians, Egyptian engineers, Chinese alchemists, and countless voices long lost to history. A single spark never reached these archives. The Library of Alexandria survived. Civilization's timeline, as we know it, would be unrecognizable. Science, technology, politics, all would have been accelerated centuries ahead. But what would that world look like, and who would wield this knowledge? The Library of Alexandria, founded in the 3rd century BCE under Ptolemaic Egypt, was more than a collection of scrolls. It was an audacious attempt to preserve and compile every fragment of human understanding into a single, living organism of knowledge. Scholars from Greece, Babylon, India, and Egypt traveled there, some for decades, devoting their lives to studying mathematics, medicine, astronomy, engineering, and literature. Its holdings were vast, perhaps numbering hundreds of thousands of scrolls, including works now forever lost to time. Astronomical observations from Babylonian priests, Indian treatises on zero and infinity, Egyptian engineering manuals, and Greek philosophical debates coexisted under one roof. In this singular convergence, the entire ancient world spoke in a chorus of curiosity, experiment, and invention. Yet the library's existence was fragile. Political turmoil, fires, invasions, and neglect threatened its survival repeatedly. By the Roman conquest, only fragments remained. The destruction of these texts set humanity back centuries. Medicine regressed, mathematics and engineering stagnated, astronomy required rediscovery, and countless literary and philosophical works vanished, leaving gaps that delayed the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and even the Industrial Revolution. The absence of cumulative knowledge left human civilization stumbling through rediscovery, reinventing what had once been known. But imagine a world in which the library survived, intact, every scroll preserved, copied, and disseminated. In such a world, the Greeks would not merely theorize about mathematics, they would possess the fully developed arithmetic of India, the algebra of Mesopotamia, and sophisticated Chinese mechanics. Archimedes' innovations in levers, pulleys, and hydraulics would merge with centuries of engineering knowledge from distant lands. Steam engines, mechanized mills, and water-powered machinery could emerge in the Mediterranean centuries before the European Renaissance. Agriculture would transform, irrigation systems perfected, cities efficiently supplied with water and energy, commerce expanding along roads and canals that never had to be reinvented. The earliest stirrings of industrialization might occur not in the 18th century, but in the 1st century BCE. Medicine would undergo a revolution. Egyptian knowledge of anatomy, combined with Greek philosophy of natural science and Indian surgical texts, would yield comprehensive medical compendiums. Techniques for sterilization, surgical precision, and herbal pharmacology could prevent plagues, reduce infant mortality, and extend life expectancy far beyond the limits of the ancient world. Epidemics like the Black Death might have been mitigated or even prevented. A physician in Alexandria could predict disease patterns, devise inoculations, and establish hospitals centuries ahead of their actual emergence. The balance between human understanding and empirical practice would have shifted dramatically, potentially creating a society in which death from ignorance was far less common. Astronomy and navigation would similarly leap forward. With the records of Babylonian star charts, Indian planetary calculations, and Chinese observations, humans could map the heavens with precision unmatched for centuries. Mariners could navigate vast oceans long before Columbus or Magellan, potentially connecting continents, cultures, and trade routes much earlier in history. The age of exploration would arrive not in the 15th century, but perhaps a millennium earlier. Knowledge of the world's geography, weather patterns, and celestial navigation would allow humans to traverse oceans with confidence, spreading technology, ideas, and innovation across continents with unprecedented speed. Yet this acceleration of science and technology would also transform politics and power. A technologically advanced Mediterranean in the 1st century BCE would dramatically shift the balance between empires. Rome, with access to comprehensive engineering and military knowledge, could expand differently, perhaps establishing an infrastructure rivaling modern cities. The speed of knowledge dissemination might prevent the rise of medieval feudalism as we know it, as advanced agriculture, industry, and communication allow for more centralized governance and stronger states. Cities would flourish as centers of learning, trade, and culture, creating early forms of what we might recognize as modern metropolises. Philosophy and literature would evolve in parallel. With the preserved works of thinkers lost to time, human culture would mature at an accelerated rate. Ethical debates, political theory, and artistic expression would not stagnate under religious orthodoxy or dogma, but develop continuously, informed by 1,000 years of uninterrupted thought. Literature could reflect a synthesis of global ideas, poetry and narrative enriched by the mythologies, histories, and philosophical insights of diverse civilizations. The human imagination, unshackled by the repeated loss of knowledge, would soar earlier, inspiring innovation not only in science and technology, but in governance, ethics, and culture. Education itself would transform. Schools in Alexandria, Athens, and other knowledge centers would disseminate the cumulative wisdom of the ancient world, creating generations of scholars, engineers, and philosophers trained in ways far ahead of their time. Literacy rates could be higher. Critical thinking, debate, and empirical observation would become central to social life rather than reserved for elites. A culture of inquiry might dominate the Mediterranean, shaping attitudes toward nature, experimentation, and human potential in ways our recorded history only glimpsed centuries later. However, the survival of the library would not merely accelerate known history, it would reshape global interaction in unpredictable ways. Societies beyond the Mediterranean, such as in India, China, and sub-Saharan Africa, could exchange knowledge through established networks of trade and scholarship, rather than experiencing delays in the transmission of ideas. Mathematical, astronomical, and technological knowledge from Asia and Africa could influence Europe far earlier, creating a truly interconnected world long before the modern era. Cultural syncretism, collaboration, and technological cross-pollination would define the trajectory of human civilization. Yet, even in this accelerated world, challenges remain. Power struggles, human ambition, and warfare would not vanish. They would be intensified by the availability of advanced knowledge. Weapons technology could develop centuries before its historical arrival, making conflicts potentially more devastating. Political systems might struggle to cope with populations capable of unprecedented learning and critical thought, challenging authority in ways rulers would not anticipate. The moral and ethical implications of wielding powerful technology centuries early would pose dilemmas humanity was historically unprepared to face. In other words, a world with a preserved library is not utopian. It is one of immense potential, fraught with risk, brilliance, and peril in equal measure. By imagining this alternate history, one begins to appreciate the fragility of our own timeline. Every lost scroll, every destroyed codex, every fragment of knowledge that vanished with the library represents centuries of delay in human understanding. The fire that never happened in this scenario becomes a lens through which we examine the contingency of progress, the role of human curiosity, and the sheer weight of what it means to preserve knowledge. History is not inevitable. It is shaped by accidents, choices, and the survival of ideas. As the library's halls continue endlessly in this vision, One can picture scholars poring over the works of Babylonian mathematicians while simultaneously reading Greek treatises on logic, debating with Egyptian engineers about the mechanics of water clocks, and copying Chinese texts on metallurgy. Each scroll is a thread in a vast tapestry, a continuous lineage of insight connecting past and future. Humanity's timeline is no longer punctuated by centuries of ignorance, but flows as an unbroken river of discovery. In this imagined reality, the technological gap between ancient and modern times narrows dramatically. By the medieval period, the world could possess technologies that our own timeline only developed in the 19th or 20th century. Printing presses, mechanical clocks, water turbines, and early forms of electricity generation might emerge far sooner. The Renaissance, instead of being a rediscovery, becomes a continuum of advancement. The scientific revolution is not a sudden burst after a long, dark age, but a steady accumulation, allowing humans to explore medicine, physics, chemistry, and engineering at a pace historically unimaginable. And yet, beyond the science, the library's survival would foster a deeper, globalized philosophical culture. Ethics, governance, and human rights could evolve centuries ahead of schedule. Civilizations might experiment with democracy, rule of law, and civil liberties in ways that avoid centuries of authoritarian stagnation. Literature, art, and drama would reflect a world continuously informed by the wisdom of ages, creating societies in which curiosity, creativity, and humanism are deeply embedded in culture. By the end of this first millennium in the library's timeline, the Mediterranean and beyond could be a network of cities connected by knowledge, innovation, and trade, where humans wield technology and science responsibly, or at least with a far earlier understanding of their consequences. The boundaries between East and West blur as ideas travel freely along trade routes, creating a genuinely global intellectual community centuries ahead of historical reality. The Library of Alexandria becomes not only a repository of knowledge, but a crucible for civilization's accelerated evolution. The survival of the library, then, is not merely a historical what-if. It is a mirror reflecting the potential of humanity when knowledge endures. It forces us to ask how much of our progress was delayed by destruction, loss, or neglect. How different would our world be if the cumulative wisdom of civilizations had remained intact? And what lessons can we draw for the preservation of knowledge today, in the digital age, where information is abundant yet fragile? In this imagined timeline, the library continues to stand, silent but omnipresent, a testament to human curiosity, foresight, and the unbroken potential of discovery. The survival of the Library of Alexandria would have reverberated across every corner of the ancient world and beyond, creating a civilization that advanced centuries ahead of its historical timeline. Where the loss of knowledge in our reality forced repeated rediscovery, in this alternate world, inventions, ideas, and discoveries were cumulative, building upon one another without interruption. By the 1st century CE, humans would have possessed technologies that, in our timeline, would only appear in the Industrial Revolution. Water-driven mills powering complex machinery, primitive steam engines moving goods along canals, and precise mechanical clocks regulating urban life. Engineering marvels of antiquity, roads, aqueducts, bridges, and even rudimentary urban sanitation systems would be standardized and replicated across empires, allowing populations to thrive in ways historically unimaginable. Medicine, too, would have been transformed. Instead of fragmented knowledge scattered across regions, physicians and scholars would have had access to comprehensive medical texts, combining Egyptian anatomical insights, Greek philosophies of health, and Indian surgical treatises. Epidemics that devastated populations in the Middle Ages, such as the plague of Justinian or later the Black Death, could have been mitigated or prevented entirely. Hospitals might have existed centuries before the Renaissance, equipped with sanitation systems, herbal pharmacology, and surgical practices advanced enough to sustain large urban populations, life expectancy could have increased dramatically, and literacy would likely have spread alongside improvements in public health, as educated citizens could read and disseminate medical knowledge. This accelerated trajectory would also have reshaped global politics. Empires would expand not merely through brute force, but through infrastructure, trade, and knowledge networks. Rome might have developed advanced roads, standardized engineering, and public institutions that prevented the fragmentation of the Western Empire. Governance could have become more centralized, with sophisticated bureaucracies informed by centuries of political theory preserved in the library. Concepts of law, civic responsibility, and public administration would have matured, perhaps allowing for democratic experiments or codified rights far earlier than in our historical timeline. Without centuries lost to stagnation, human societies would not be forced to relearn lessons of governance repeatedly. Trade and exploration would have advanced rapidly. With accurate astronomical charts, knowledge of ocean currents, and shipbuilding techniques preserved and disseminated, humans could navigate long distances centuries earlier. Imagine explorers crossing the Atlantic or the Indian Ocean a millennium before Columbus or Vasco da Gama, establishing early trade networks between Africa, Europe, India, and the Americas. Cultural exchange, technological transfer, and economic integration would occur much earlier, creating a truly interconnected world. Civilizations that historically remained isolated for centuries could interact, exchanging innovations, philosophies, and artistic styles. Knowledge of the Americas civilizations might reach Eurasia long before the 15th century, reshaping the course of global history entirely. Technological innovation would accelerate further. Imagine early mechanical printing presses allowing mass reproduction of texts in the 1st century BCE, making literacy and education more widespread. Machines for mining, metallurgy, and textile production could appear centuries ahead of time, enabling an early proto-industrial society. Energy technologies might develop in this alternate timeline: water wheels powering factories, rudimentary steam or compressed air devices, and perhaps even early experiments with electricity. The Industrial Revolution, instead of being a sudden leap after centuries of stagnation, would be a steady continuum of improvement. Humans would approach modern scientific methods far earlier, blending observation, experimentation, and engineering into daily life.
Culturally, the world would be transformed in profound ways. Literature, philosophy, and art would reflect centuries of uninterrupted dialogue between civilizations. Greek tragedies could coexist with Babylonian epics, Egyptian religious texts, Indian mathematics, and Chinese philosophical treatises, producing a cosmopolitan, multicultural intellectual environment. Artistic styles might evolve through synthesis, blending architecture, sculpture, and storytelling from diverse regions. Ethics and philosophy, shaped by cross-cultural exchange, could mature society's understanding of justice, morality, and governance centuries earlier, potentially influencing how societies treat citizens, women, and minorities. Education would not be a privilege of elites alone. With centralized knowledge repositories and early printing, literacy could spread widely, creating a populace capable of critical thought, problem-solving, and scientific reasoning far earlier than in our timeline. The survival of the library would also reshape religion and philosophy. Religions could develop in a world already infused with empirical observation and knowledge from multiple cultures, possibly reducing dogmatic rigidity. Syncretic philosophies blending multiple traditions would emerge, emphasizing observation, ethics, and practical wisdom. Mysticism would coexist with rational science, but rational inquiry would dominate intellectual discourse, creating societies more tolerant of debate, experimentation, and innovation. The separation between faith and science might appear far earlier, encouraging a worldview grounded in inquiry rather than fear or superstition. Economically, civilizations would flourish. Agriculture would be optimized using preserved ancient knowledge, with irrigation, crop rotation, and livestock management widespread. Surpluses would support urbanization, allowing cities to grow as centers of learning, industry, and trade. Early banking systems and standardized currencies might emerge, enabling large-scale commerce across continents. A global economy could develop centuries ahead, connecting Eurasia, Africa, and the Americas through trade, culture, and diplomacy. Knowledge, rather than conquest alone, would become the dominant driver of prosperity. But the accelerated timeline would also present challenges. Weapons technology could advance centuries earlier, increasing the destructive potential of warfare. Political systems would struggle to manage populations armed not only with weapons, but with knowledge and critical thinking. Ethical dilemmas would appear centuries before societies historically faced them. How to regulate technology, medicine, or energy? Who controls knowledge? How is power distributed when education and technical skill are widespread? The library's survival would not guarantee a utopia, but it would shift the battlefield from ignorance to responsible stewardship of knowledge.
Globally, the library could foster unprecedented cooperation. Scholars in India, China, and Africa might communicate with counterparts in Egypt or Greece through networks of trade and correspondence. Intellectual centers across continents would exchange ideas, forming a proto-global scientific community. Discoveries in one region could influence innovations elsewhere almost instantly, creating a cumulative effect that accelerates progress in every field: mathematics, astronomy, engineering, medicine, and philosophy. Humanity could develop modern science, technology, and cultural sophistication centuries before the historical Renaissance and Enlightenment. In this alternate history, the 15th and 16th centuries would not be marked by discovery in the European sense, but by integration and synthesis. Civilizations would already have achieved technological and cultural sophistication that, in our timeline, required hundreds of additional years. Exploration of new continents would be informed by centuries of astronomical knowledge, engineering, and navigation. Cities across Eurasia and Africa could rival modern metropolises with advanced sanitation, lighting, public education, and mechanized industries. A truly globalized intellectual culture would thrive, producing philosophers, scientists, and engineers capable of addressing complex societal and environmental challenges far earlier than historically possible. The survival of the library would also preserve countless languages, scripts, and oral traditions, preventing cultural erasure. Histories, mythologies, and philosophies of lost civilizations would inform later generations, creating a richer, more nuanced understanding of humanity. Literary and artistic traditions would evolve through synthesis, producing a global human culture of unparalleled depth. The diversity of thought, preserved and integrated, would encourage tolerance, innovation, and resilience in the face of crises. Ultimately, the library's continued existence is not just a story of technological acceleration, but of human potential realized. It serves as a reminder that the loss of knowledge has historically delayed progress, and that the preservation of ideas can reshape civilizations. In this alternate timeline, humanity achieves a level of understanding, connectivity, and capability centuries earlier, but it must still wrestle with ethical responsibility, governance, and the challenges of wielding power wisely. The story of the Library of Alexandria, had it survived, is both a cautionary tale and an inspiring vision. Knowledge preserved is civilization preserved, and the potential of humanity is limited only by our ability to protect and apply what we know. Walking through the imagined halls of the library, one sees not just scrolls and texts, but the continuity of human curiosity, creativity, and reasoning. Each preserved manuscript represents a conversation across centuries, a cumulative effort to understand the universe, humanity, and the principles that govern life. In this world, the library stands not only as a repository, but as the engine of civilization itself, shaping a human history far richer, more advanced, and interconnected than the one we know. And so, in imagining the library survived, one imagines a world accelerated in knowledge, enlightened in thought, and connected in unprecedented ways. Humanity, unburdened by centuries of forgotten wisdom, strides forward with confidence, curiosity, and responsibility. The library's survival is not merely a hypothetical, it is a vision of what could have been, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the fragile but extraordinary potential of civilization itself.